Speaker, therapist, and author Linda Carroll brings what many call life-changing perspective and information to her audiences.
So, a skier would say, for instance, I have spent my whole life on the slope, and it's so incredible because now I'm in love with a knitter, and I'm learning how to sit on the couch. And the knitter says, I finally got somebody to motivate me off the couch. I fall in love with a skier.
People love the information, you know. They want to learn, they want to be inspired, and I think that they want to hear somebody talk who they can relate to.
Linda removes the mystery behind relationships, our search for self, dealing with loss, and the complex issues within the world of adoption. Linda brings it all home in an entertaining and informative way, while reminding us that it's all about relationships and the cycles in which they exist.
There are predictable cycles in a relationship, just as there are in development, in child development.
When a woman says, honey, I want to talk, his heartbeat goes up 10 beats per minute. Isn't that interesting? And when he says, not now, her heartbeat goes up 10 beats per minute. Can you just hear what's going on in the room? Isn't that interesting? Because I think Robert Bly, does anyone know who he is? Yeah, Robert Bly, I once heard him speak. He said he would rather, and I think a lot of men feel this way, he would rather face 10,000 soldiers coming at him in battle than face an angry woman. Because this isn't true for all women and all men, but it's true for the majority of them, that when men and women start to argue in the regular way that we argue, or you know the skills, women's IQs rise, and most men's IQs drop.
These principles are not only a roadmap for romance. Linda reveals to us that these cycles appear in practically all facets of life.
I had one woman who heard me give the talk on love cycles, who was she was a head of a law firm, and she said that this was totally applicable to new lawyers, that they would come in they were sort of in love with what they were doing, and then they would hit this place where the romance went out of law, and they thought, what am I doing? Why did I go into law to begin with? And then if they stayed with it, they'd go through a cycle very much like the cycle of relationship. They'd learn how to be more realistic, how to manage themselves better. They'd learn the skills to navigate some of the more difficult things that occurred, and then they'd find themselves loving it again.
It could be the closest thing to a user's guide to life.
Couples on this end don't know how to manage conflict. So they either explode and are volatile, or they push it under the rug, and the rug gets very, very lumpy, and they trip over it all the time. Because most of us don't know how to manage conflict well. On this end, the couples who thrive have the same issues as these couples, but they deal with conflict in skillful ways.
I think it saves us so much pain and gives us actions that we can do and skills that we can learn to make the process so much easier.
Linda's critically acclaimed book, Remember Who You Are, is the basis for exploration of women's spirituality and is a very popular topic at her speaking engagements.
If I'm not my story, who am I? And that's the question, and I think of people that jump out of buildings when they lose their money, or who commit suicide when their lovers leave them, and how identified we are with our story, and we think we are the story, so much so that that for some people, life loses its meaning without that other, whatever that is, job, person, bank account.
For those dealing with the devastation of loss, Linda shatters conventional wisdom. Learn how seeking closure can actually block our path to healing and self-acceptance.
I think we have very much this culture, this idea that there can be closure, and often we will hear people talk about terrible tragedies and how, when this happens, there will be closure. And what I discovered in my own journey is that there is no closure, that there is acceptance that sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. So I don't even think we want closure, because closure throws us back. Closure implies it didn't happen. And out of those are people growing experiences. I honor my wounds. I'm not going to pretend they didn't happen.
Linda's own unlikely quest for her birth mother is chronicled in her beautifully written work, Her Mother's Daughter. An insightful and touching subject, Linda has spoken about her story all over the world, and as seen here on the highly acclaimed City Arts and Lecture Series. As with most of Linda's personal experiences, she's able to capture the lessons learned and relate them for the rest of us to benefit from.
When I talk about that, there's so many things that are in that story. You know, the fear of finding out who we are. And for me, the story is a great story that people love because it turned out so well. But the other part about it is that when I met my mother, there was when I saw that name, there was a part of me that rested. And I remember reading a story about a woman who had been raised in a great family, and when she found her mother was in a mental institution with a sugar bowl haircut and didn't know her. And she said that she walked up to this woman who had a baby doll in her arms and was drooling, and she looked at her eyes and she said how sad she was to see this sad human being, but even in that situation, something in her was so glad she found.
This is really good news for everybody, because if you're in that part of a relationship with a person that isn't willing to do the work, or doesn't know how, you can still do it with yourself.
I asked them what they learned. What did you learn in junior high about communication skills? Everyone starts to laugh because, of course, we didn't learn anything. What did movies teach you about relationships? And again, everybody laughs because in movies, and I grew up in the 50s, so those were really different movies. In movies, relationships always ended the same way. The couple rode off into the sunset, the curtain dropped, and no one ever told you what was on the other side of the sunset. It was just, that was it. So a whole generation of people were stuck on this side of the sunset and didn't know what to do when we got to the other side.
Let's get curious enough to see what happens if we can learn these skills and figure out what was the promise that brought us into the relationship to begin with. And is there some way that we can find to manifest that promise, to get that promise back, to reach that promise?